cards. As I start counting for you. He's got to get it all arranged. It's kind of like when I get into my husband's car. I have to do the rear view mirror.
Readjust. I think it's going up, isn't it? It's like an elevator, but very slow.
Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon, early evening. I'm Robert Buxton. It's great to be back here at Wellspring and see so many familiar faces, and I think you're going to be having me once a month now, which I hope you don't get tired of. I hope you like corny jokes, the same ones. Some do, okay, because that's what I really am a specialist in. Today is a holiday. It's the July 14th, Bastille Day. So I thought I'd start off with a little improvisation for it. Maybe I'll throw in La Marseillaise. We have some French, connections here. So.
You got a flag on the wall.
A fly on the wall?
Flag.
Oh, a flag. Well, we have an American flag, yeah. Their revolution happened after ours. So there was some, I don't remember what it was, some politicians were sitting and the Europeans were saying, we're much older than the U.S. And the U.S. person said, we're the oldest democracy. So, true. But anyway, 14th of July, Bastille Day. So I figure I'll do this little improvisation here. Now, I will give you a heads up. I was listening to Liszt's Faust Symphony in the car. So if it sounds like Liszt, maybe that's why.
I heard a lot of it because I got lost. So maybe it's Liszt's fault.
so there definitely, I heard Liszt coming out there sometimes. Now I'm going to play an odd program in a sense because it's all Paganini. But it's through the eyes, or the ears rather, of Schumann and Brahms. I think I did maybe one of these when I was here in April. But since that time, despite my laziness, I learned more of these, and I learned this set of Brahms variations on Paganini, which terrifying to play. So they're quite difficult and new for me. But let's start with Schumann. Schumann's arrangements of Paganini, I think, were among, if not the first, arrangements that anyone did of Paganini. He wrote them in 1832, which is several years before Liszt's more famous Paganini arrangements. And I'll talk a bit about Paganini. Forgive me if you've heard this same story before. I've played lots of things for you based on Paganini, but Paganini was a violinist who lived from the late 18th century into the early 19th century. And he was a very big personality, to say the least, very controversial. He may not have been a person of the greatest moral character also. I won't get into detail, but he was like a rock star of today. He was this phenomenon. Think of someone like Elvis in the 50s or something, and who similarly divided opinion. You either loved him or you hated him. There wasn't much lukewarm. Paganini was like that. And I guess the people who didn't like him, they said he was possessed by the devil. And this became something, I think he ran with that. I'll explain later, one of the pieces that has a nickname called The Devil's Laugh. But this was this idea of him being possessed. People who didn't like him, I think, said that. But the Romantics, who were a bit younger, they were born in 1810, 1811, like Schumann and Liszt, respectively. They admired Paganini because they saw themselves in him, or they saw, I think, what they wanted to do in him, and that wild virtuosity, this spontaneity of what he did. So that's really Paganini. So Schumann, as a young man in his 20s, he heard Paganini and was just blown away. And he wrote these studies based on Paganini caprices, solo violin pieces, the originals. Now, Schumann also did a set of accompaniments, piano accompaniments, meant to go along with the original Paganini pieces. You don't hear those too often. Furthermore, you don't hear these too often either, because you usually hear Liszt's version of Paganini, or Brahms or Rachmaninoff, but the Schumann are not played as much. But I would say that they are a little bit closer to the original Paganini pieces than Liszt or some others. In other words, Schumann doesn't add too much to change the originals. I mean, he does add accompaniment in the left hand and such. So let's start with the first one. This one I did last time for you, and then the rest, there's 6 of them. So those I haven't done for you. I think you're going to hear from the first few notes why Paganini was controversial, why he was this kind of wild man at the time, even the way he looked. He had a very thin and wiry build, and now we know that he possibly had Marfan's syndrome, which contributed to a very elongated face and such. It just goes to show how knowledge is everything, and nowadays we know these things. In those days, that people didn't know, and so they said, "Oh, he must be possessed. He looks." That's not very nice, So, but anyway, here's Paganini, who, in the words of violinist Ivry Gitlis, was like the Big Bang in classical music. In other words, there's before Paganini, and then there's after. Everything changed. His style was just out of the blue, his own thing. Anyway, here it is, the first. many, there's many quotes, but this is one that I love. Rossini heard Paganini play. And Rossini was a classical composer who famously had very little tragedy in his life. If you think of people like Schubert or Chopin or Beethoven, their lives were quite dark, but not Rossini's. Rossini was mainly, actually at the age of 50, he decided to retire from composing. He said, thank goodness I don't have to do that again. And he just cooked lavish meals for his friends, wrote a cookbook. He enjoyed life. And he's one of my favorite composers too, and personalities. So here's the quote. He said that there were 2 times in his life, only 2 times, that he cried. The first was when he heard Paganini play the violin, and the second was when his favorite pasta dish fell over or bore a rowboat into a lake. So, it just gives you an idea of Rossini. So the next piece is called La Chasse, the hunt. And I think about a year or so ago, I played you Liszt's version of this, which is quite different. He goes a la Jerry Lee Lewis. He does these things, these glissandos. Not Schumann. Schumann's a little more conservative with what he does, but nevertheless, a great, great, great arrangement. It's called the hunt because it's imitating the sounds of horn calls, hunting horns, Anytime you have that in music, it's usually some kind of symbol of the countryside. So Mozart has things like so that a listener at that time, they would hear that and they would immediately realize, oh, we're in the countryside. In those days, they used horn calls for communication, not only for hunting, but communication in when out in the middle of the country, because it's not as if you could go to Walmart and buy a duck whistle now, like you can do nowadays. I wonder if Paganini lived in rural North Carolina, this piece might have sounded more like a duck whistle, but I don't know, that's just the crazy thoughts I have at 2 a.m. So here it is. This is a beautiful piece. expect from Paganini, but maybe it's Paganini before he had his coffee. I also think about this, that when I visited Italy, I felt very charged up the whole time, and I wondered why, and realized it was because the coffee is so good and it's cheap there. So I was drinking way too much coffee. And maybe Paganini, and I don't know if I'm too far off, because I also read somewhere that the Enlightenment era and the philosophes, people like Rousseau and Voltaire, that came out of the cafes. And it's because people were drinking more coffee, as opposed to beer or something, or wine instead. And as you know, coffee stimulates a very different kind of conversation than alcohol. So, but anyway, it's just a thought. But this piece, to me, it's very pastoral, and it just sounds like a sunset in Tuscany for me. Paganini was from Genova, and I haven't been to Genova, but I've been to different parts of Italy. And there's a natural beauty there that's it's unbelievable. And I feel it in this piece. I can't explain why, but finally, there's these chords there that sound like the strumming of a guitar. On the one hand, yes, when a violin plays big chord, they'll do that. They'll roll it. But Paganini, turns out, was also a great guitarist. And he wrote lots of music for the guitar. And so you see, maybe he really was a rock star. What I love about Paganini, even there, where it's not all hyper and wild and zany, but it's like the improvisation right now. It's not like a sonata form or anything. There's the spontaneity of it that's almost like folk music or gypsy music, and that's part of, I think, what makes Paganini so special and so unique. The next two are humorous. You might not maybe laugh out loud, but they're comic in the sense, maybe more like wit or irony or sarcasm. And I feel you don't have this kind of wit in music from Paganini, but until you get to Prokofiev and Shostakovich. This one sounds like an evil laugh. That's why there's the nickname, the devil's laugh, for here. It sounds like a maniacal laugh, maybe a James Bond villain laughing. It's not the good kind of laugh, it's not laughing at a corny joke that I may have told, but here's how it sounds. I'll just play you that. It's a laugh, but it's a little bit creepy. And then in the middle, it's as if the mask comes off and it's just pure anger and rage. And then it goes right back to the laugh. Very quirky music. And pardon the very bad pun here, but I think Paganini was a very high-strung person. Yes, he played violin, but I really feel he was high-strung. Sorry. I know these are short, each one's very short, and caprice means capricious, off the cuff. And that's what these are. They're just these capricious things. I had a history teacher in high school who had a thick Missouri, or Missouri, he called it, Missouri accent, even though he was from New Jersey. I don't understand it, but he would say, my tests and exams are arbitrary and capricious. I always remember that. So the next one is very similar. It's comic, angry, and then comic. And here's a scenario that I imagine very vividly every time I play this piece. So try to imagine it too, I would ask. So imagine you're having lunch at a restaurant with a person that you know, but not too well. They're an acquaintance of yours. But you're having a very pleasant conversation, small talk, giggling. And then the waiter comes to you, pours the water, and spills just a drop. And this acquaintance of yours gets so angry, flies off into a rage, makes a scene. You're sitting there, awkward, And then the waiter walks away, and then this acquaintance turns to you and just starts giggling and talking to you as if nothing happened. That's this piece. I have a friend who has a dog just like that. It's the sweetest dog ever. You pet them, and then the wind blows a certain way, and they become very nasty, and then, they go right back to being sweet. Maybe Paganini was like that. I didn't know him personally, I wasn't alive in 1809, but I have a feeling he was something like that. So, here it is. By the way, do you hear the horn calls in the other? There's that, and then you're going to hear it in here too. It's almost like a signature, those horn calls. It's some obsession. Every time I play that, I find it funny. Did you imagine, especially from the angry middle part, how it just goes right back to just being giggly. It's right here. So, the next one, the butterfly.
I said it feels like raging fire to the butterflies.
Can I steal that? Okay, I love it because, I really like thinking of music with analogies. Analogies that come to you, they come to you. So I'll tell you a story. I played somewhere, and a lady came to me, and usually people are embarrassed to tell me, but this lady, she said, I'm embarrassed to tell you because I don't play piano. I said, it doesn't matter. I don't cook, but I love to eat. So, right, well, I can cook, but not very well. So, but anyway, she said, I had she said she has synesthesia, which is where she sees colors for musical, and she has all these associations. And she said, but I don't know if they're correct, she said. I said, there's no such thing. It's an art form. It's not a science. Please tell me. I begged her. And she said, okay. I was playing Beethoven 32 variations in C minor at that time. It's wonderful. That's wrong, but it's an incredible piece. And she So, at any rate, the next one, and this is the last of the Opus 3 of Schumann. Schumann actually wrote 2 sets of Paganini arrangements. I have a whole second book to learn. Keeps me out of trouble, keeps me busy, all these things to learn. This one doesn't sound like Paganini at all, it sounds like Schumann. And the reason is because instead of putting the violin part in the right hand where you hear it prominently, he puts it in the left hand as accompaniment. Now, one of my teachers, I can hear him scolding me right now for saying that. My teacher, Solomon Minkowski from Cuba, who's no longer with us, of course, he would tell me, that's ridiculous. In Bach, the left hand is not the accompaniment. What's wrong with you? I could see him saying that. But most of the time, the left hand is accompaniment and the right hand is foreground. So here, the original caprice of Paganini is right here. These arpeggios as an accompaniment. Schumann writes this motif in the right hand, which is very Schumannesque. I haven't talked much about Schumann, but Schumann was quite different from Paganini. Yes, he absorbed a lot from Paganini, but Schumann, his life was incredibly tragic. He suffered from mental illness, probably bipolar disorder. And he did not reach 50, he lived to be only 46. And so he was also a very literary person, wanted to be a novelist originally. And actually, he wanted to be a novelist, sort of didn't. He wanted to be a virtuoso pianist. And like Liszt, arranging Paganini was the first step. So Liszt did his Paganini arrangements and took off as a touring virtuoso. Schumann damaged his hands. Makes sense because these pieces are so tricky, but I'm kidding. He damaged his hands in another way with a device meant to strengthen the pinky finger. He got some sort of mechanical device, and I don't know, it damaged the ligaments or something. It's horrible. So he turned to composition after this, completely, not trying to be a performing pianist. But anyway, back to what I was saying, he was a very literary person, and he created these alter egos for himself, literary alter egos. And the 2 main ones are Florestan and Eusebius. Florestan is the extroverted, over-the-top character, like Paganini's music. Eusebius is the dreamy, depressed character. And people suggest, I think correctly, that that's the 2 sides of his bipolar disorder. It's really interesting to think in those terms. Anyway, this is the G minor, the 6th of these, and conclude with that and then play some more crazy music by Paganini. But not arranged by Schumann. I don't know what it is, but maybe it's just because it's Schumann, and the way he writes for the piano is so awkward. I had a teacher who told me Schumann loves to do these accompaniments that sound like swirling, and you heard that here. Those arpeggios. Listen to the left hand. Like you're standing at the beach, and there are the waves, and they're just swirling all around. He does this all the time, Schumann. In the piano concerto, you have it just. And this teacher said, doesn't that remind you of Van Gogh's Starry Night, the swirling sky? Another artist who suffered from mental illness. And I love that connection. I love connections like that, just like you said, the butterfly and the fire. So here's the first book of variations, only the first book I learned. Paganini Variations by Johannes Brahms. And I ask your forgiveness in advance because it's a new piece for me. And these are so tricky, I don't know what it is. Schumann and Brahms, I think that they didn't write music while they sat at the piano, like Chopin and others did, and where they would see if it, well, frankly, if it fits the hands. I don't think they really cared. They heard it in their heads. Maybe they were thinking orchestra, and they just wrote it to paper. It doesn't matter if your hands do this. So what? You figure it out, pianist. But Brahms, as a young man, he walked up to the Schumann's front door, Robert and Clara Schumann, and she was also a great composer and pianist. He had with him his 3 piano sonatas that he'd written and probably a toothbrush in the other hand, and that's it. And they pretty much adopted him, welcomed him to their house as if he was their son. And they had many kids of their own, so I don't know, it must have been a very, very chaotic home. But Brahms lived with the Schumanns and, of course, absorbed the musical world, the general cultural world of the Schumanns. And he also assisted the family as Robert Schumann. Quite tragically, he tried to jump into the Rhine River in winter and was institutionalized at the end of it. So it's really sad. Brahms was there every step of the way, and he, for the rest of his life and her life, Clara Schumann, they exchanged these letters to each other. They had a very deep friendship and musical collaboration as well, the two of them. So there's the connection between Brahms and Schumann. Brahms is a paradox of sorts because he's from the North German city of Hamburg, which is near the North Sea. It's a very austere climate there, you know. I have a friend from there, and he says if you really want to understand Brahms, go to the countryside near Hamburg, and it's gray and cold, and the North Sea is there. So there's this heavy Teutonic quality to Brahms. On the other hand, he lived in Vienna most of his life, and he befriended Hungarian gypsies. Why do you think he wrote things like this? One of the variations here sounds like gypsy folk music. That playful glissando, which hurts the hands. But so this Brahms, he's this paradox. As a young man, even the way he looked changed so much. If you look at photos of him as a young man, he was a very distinguished young man. And as he, as he grew older, he looked almost identical to Santa Claus. He had this big beard, and he was a big guy. I think he had very big hands. He must have to have written this. And, you don't judge a person by how they look, but I really feel like, I'm not built like a linebacker in football. And I think he was. And so that's maybe is what makes it so difficult for me. So anyway, Brahms was such a genius and sui generis, like all of these people. I can describe him, but he really is just his own thing. So here's the first book of Paganini Variations by Brahms, based on the famous 24th Caprice, which is each variation moves further and further away from Paganini and more into Brahms. By the end, it's not really Paganini anymore. And Brahms wrote this originally as a set of finger exercises. And he decided that they were musically interesting, so he just turned them into a piece to perform. And so here I am playing them. It's quite masochistic, actually, so here it is. very tricky music. But it's beautiful, and the soft variations are just pure magic, I think. There's a story about Brahms. I'm going to do one quick thing before I go non-classical, but there's a pianist named Seymour Bernstein who's still playing. He's, I think, 99 or something, still playing a lot. So he played, he did a performance in Newark, New Jersey in the 1940s. It was at a home where Viennese widows lived. And this lady came up to him and said, at the time, she said, I'm 105 years old and I heard Brahms play some of the pieces you played today at Clara Schumann's funeral. And Seymour Bernstein almost fainted. And then he collected himself and he said, well, what was it like? And she said, what was it like? You're clearly a much better pianist. It was terrible. He made all the... So, I don't know if it's a true story, but I just thought that was really funny. One newspaper, I'm not trying to excuse my mistakes, but there was a newspaper review of Brahms playing his second concerto, which is one of the most transcendent, incredible pieces. And the newspaper reviewer wrote, see, people could be sarcastic back in the 19th century. They said, obviously he took great care to write all the correct notes. However, he did not take that same care to play all the correct notes. So today's program was very, very, very heavy. And I'm going to play something that's really, it's much lighter. It's a Willie Nelson song. Crazy. I know it's funny, but I've told you before, I have two immigrant parents. My mother's an immigrant from the Soviet Union. That's where the classical music thing comes from. My dad's an immigrant from southeastern Virginia. And that's where my love of this music comes from. And I also lived in Texas for a while, where I studied with a very Russian teacher, Vladimir Vyardo. I would drive him around, and there was one time we were driving, and he says in his low Russian voice, do you like barrel full of crackers? I said, what's barrel full? You mean Cracker Barrel? You know, the restaurant. He said, yes, I like it very much. It's like Russian peasant food. I go. So anyway, it's been an interesting mix for me of the South and Russia, and my parents and my upbringing. So here is Crazy by Willie Nelson.
I won't sing, I'm sorry. I have to sing this.
think we should stop. So next time I'll play you some. Sorry, gospel fans, I didn't play you any gospel today, but Willie Nelson once said, "It's all gospel, really." So I'll say that too. So thank you very much for coming, and I'll see you. Stay cool out there.
Very real. Just that's my life. All the times I forget. Well, it's really fine. You don't.
You left after I was about a year. I was an engineer.
I work for them.
Ready, Jim? Let's go back and go to
I left the day, I do close and start the business.
Yeah, I was looking at that. Because even if I had a I would say never.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here. Oh, you want to touch them? They're going to be
Oh, no, I can't.
Oh, okay.
I don't work.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you give us some results?
The sorts, I can. Pictures at an exhibition.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. This is my Russian stock.
One day I was walking out of work. Felsman.
Oh, Felsman.
He was going to play pictures at an exhibition. I go through this.
Oh, well, thank you. I tried.
Yeah. Well, just walk in.
Very nice.
Credit card number, you got my 100% off or something.
Oh, great way to spend it. What a happy coincidence. Thank you.
Just reminded me of
My teacher is French, so glad another glad.
I got the wrong, but.
Oh, perfect.
Nice.
Great to see you.
Okay.
And I'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Both of them. call or something, but I just, you know, I'm going on, you know, but,
I'll speak to Eddie again.
oh, thanks.
Why not? You deserve it.
Well,
Thank you.
oh, there's, I have a brother, my brother's office, sure, yes, so we're, lately, trying to work out a few things for his future, you know, it's like really swamped, but it's no complaints.
Okay,
What about you?
yeah, it's fine, and the Lord.
Oh, wow.
It is. How are you, you ready?
Talk to
You
Sam.
can, you
One
can,
out of
right.
three that don't make it.
Holly, that's right.
But I got a ways to go, not too far.
Take a rest.
I know.
Or to feel better.
All right.
I can carry the book out to the board. It's a heavy.
Yeah, it's a little Yeah, Haley and Jess were over in this deal, those two, it's just one. I know that we're always looking for new ones, so whenever anybody knows. Be on the list.
But I would love to see you, like you said, there's been so many things going on, but I'll give you a call, maybe if you wanna go to lunch or something. Take care, so,
God bless you.
oh, God bless you too.
You are something else.
Thank you. How's the family? How are your kids?
Oh, very good. Yes, my son Brian, he's out of American Airlines now, he's flying jets,
Net jets, oh,
and he's having such a good time.
big shots taken.
But he said they make all these pilots, so they cannot tell anyone who they.
Oh, okay, so he can't even
Just
tell.
one person, you won't tell me either?
I had a family friend, my dad's from Portsmouth, Virginia, so, we had a family friend there. Their son was in the Navy SEALs
Oh.
and was in Afghanistan, and then when Bin Laden, you know, and his mother she's a very extroverted Southern lady. His mother was asking me, "You on that mission? Were you?" And so I can't say.
Yeah.
It's sworn to secrecy even to her, so
Yeah,
she was very upset about it,
yeah.
you know.
Well, you're not having to put all the furniture in.
Oh, no, I have to just get my bag. I walk out with it.
Okay.
That Brahms gives me nightmares. It's so difficult. Thank you for having me